Hi everyone, this is Mona. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining today for day 4 of the IMA for Beginners webinar series. So real quick, before we get too far in, I'd like you to try out your chat again and answer the following question. Which maintenance task do you struggle with the most? So this could be new cartons or updating configurations or UPCs, updating dimensions. Just let me know which maintenance task you struggle with the most, and we'll come back to this in just a couple of slides. As a reminder, please put your phone on mute when you're not speaking. If you're listening to it from your computer, instead of calling in, be sure to mute your computer's microphone. And please wait to audibly ask questions until designated times, and keep questions on topic and minimal. And then feel free to submit questions at any time using the chat. So I don't know if you guys were able to respond to the question. I haven't seen anything come across yet. Perhaps this is, there we go. Someone's saying they haven't dealt with maintenance yet. And knowing where to update things, case, item, etc., cartons. Okay. So today we're going to be covering quite a few topics. Again, this is Mona. I'm the Instructional Design and Training Manager with the Vendor and Item Support Team. On Monday, we went over the IMA basics and terminology, and on Tuesday, we worked on setting up new items in the grid that had been synced over. On day 3, yesterday, we went through different IMA features, including Quick Search and Changes tab, the Changes grid, the Data Catalog notifications, and some others. And then today, we're going to be talking about maintenance. We get a lot of questions from vendors about maintenance, such as how do I add a new carton to an existing item or update the configuration? How do I add a vendor pack to an existing item or duplicate an existing vendor pack? How do I add new ship points or assign different ship points for different DCs on the? How do I update dimensions? So it looks like we have a couple more responses, or really just one more response, addressing notifications. That would be with the data catalog notifications. That's not going to really be covered today. I can try to hook you up with some from our help desk team that can maybe give you some more information beyond what we discussed yesterday and the data catalog notifications feature. Just do me a favor and send me an email, vendorsuniversity@searshc.com, so that way I have your contact information, because I know that I won't be able to remember your name at the end of the webinar today, that you're needing more instruction with that specific area. All right, thanks. So the objectives today, we're going to be covering new cartons, updating carton configurations, UPC changes, vendor packs, ship point changes, and dimensions and weights changes. So first we're going to be talking about new cartons and configuration changes. So there's a few different reasons why you might need new cartons. The first one being that you need a new carton configuration. Either it wasn't correct to begin with, or maybe your merchant or inventory analyst wants additional options. Secondly, it may be that a new vendor is going to be supplying an existing item. So sometimes a vendor will supply an item, and then they discontinue supplying it, but another vendor comes in and picks up that same exact item. And so that new vendor, they would need to have their own carton and vendor pack in order to continue supplying. And then also promotional displays. If you're going to have a promotional display, we'll usually need to have an additional carton that includes that display. So do remember, whenever you add a carton, it also has to have a new vendor pack. Every carton that's created has to have a new vendor pack. So the most common errors when adding a new carton. First off, the UPCs match the incorrect quantity. So especially if it's exploding assortment carton, where it has a specific quantity versus, well, with a uniform carton it's a specific quantity, but it's just one item. With an exploding assortment carton, you have different UPCs, and you could have 2 UPCs in that exploding assortment, or you could have 20. Especially the more UPCs you start to get in a carton, it's you kind of have to double check and make sure that you are putting the correct quantity with each UPC. Another error would be that the carton dimensions do not align with the eaches. So if you have a carton already set up for a 6-pack and you're setting up a new carton for a 10-pack, those carton dimensions have to still line up with the eaches that are inside of them. It's not going to be the same as the 6-pack. It's going to be bigger. It has to be bigger. So that's another common error that does happen when vendors try to create new carton configurations. Third one would be that vendor packs were not created for the new excess members. So if you're adding on to an existing configuration, you're not just doing another option for the configuration, but you're actually adding members to an existing assortment. Those added members not only need new cartons, but they also need new vendor packs. So the process for adding new cartons depends on your setup. If you are a data sync vendor, you're using data sync, and you need to add cartons for each packages, each cartons, uniform cartons, and exploding assortment cartons, you should sync those over from your vendor rather than creating them manually. Especially if you have quite a few that you need to create, this can really cut down on the time of doing it all manually, one by one, entering every single field. It also creates more consistency and reduces error just from having to do it manually. And new vendor packs are included when cartons are synced over. So that means if you're syncing over your new cartons, it's going to automatically sync over new vendor packs as well. Whereas if you manually create your new cartons, you also have to create a new vendor pack for that new carton manually. And if you're doing assorted cartons, mixed cartons, or pallet cartons, those cannot be synced over, and you do have to build them manually in IMA, just like when you initially built the items. And so you would have to add that corresponding vendor pack. So with carton configuration updates, if you have a carton that goes operational and the original setup is incorrect, how would you fix that? Or let's say that your inventory or merchant wants additional carton assortment options. So like I said, maybe you have a 6-pack carton set up. They would like a 12-pack set up, and they want the options of being able to order those different configurations. Oops, let's skip the slide. So the process for updating configurations. If it's in process, it's very easy and simple. You can correct it directly on the grid in the vendor role. If the item has already been processed through your role and it's in the merchant or inventory role, you will have to contact your merchant or your inventory analyst and ask them to return those items to you, as long as they aren't operational yet. Now, once they become operational, you cannot fix it. You can't just go in and correct it and do a change request. You have to actually create a new carton with the correct configuration. So if you are a data sync vendor, you can just sync over that new carton with the correct configuration. If you do not use data sync or you build the cartons that cannot be synced over, then you would have to do that manually. Okay, so first I'm going to be doing a demo for updating the carton configuration on in-process items. And then I'm also going to do a demo for adding a new carton manually, just so that you can kind of see it in action in case there's ever an instance where you do end up having to do that. Okay, so I'm going to bring up my grid, and with the cart, this is for like if you have an in-process item and you haven't processed this yet, you would just update it normally in your grid, like when you're putting all of your other criteria or fields in. Now, the package configuration is located on the package tab, so you would have to click packages, and then the field is called member quantity. And right now you can see it's a 6-pack with a 1-2-2-1 configuration. Let's say that your buyer actually wanted a 12-pack and they wanted a 2-4-4-2. You would just update that. It's really simple. And then just click Save, or you can continue going back to your empty required fields and finish completing all your empty required fields and approve your grid. So updating it for in-process cartons is very, very simple. Now I'm just looking at here because this is the information that I'm using for doing my demo. So to add it manually, you would do a quick search for your item and then click the Packages tab. So from the Package tab, you would select what you want to build. We're going to build a uniform carton, which is UCRT, and we're going to click Add Package. So from this page, you have to actually enter your G10 and your vendor name. You probably have a drop-down. I do not, so I have to actually search for it. And then verify that your category is correct, and then select your subcategory. And then click Add Package. Okay, so now that you've added the package, there's some blank fields in here that you have to go in and complete. The first is the description, located right here. So you would just populate that. And your number of inners, or sorry, before we do that, actually I'm going to select, you have to select the package that you're creating the uniform carton for. So you select it from the drop-down and then click Add. And then under the each quantity, you can enter the number of those eaches that you want in your uniform carton. So we're going to do 10. Then you can also enter your number of inners and then your dimensions and your weight. So again, remember this has to align with your eaches. So if you're increasing your carton size, then your dimensions and weight are going to increase from the carton as well. So once you've completed this information, you can click Save. And then if you go back out to the Package tab, here you can see this was your each package that's already existing. And then this is your carton, your uniform carton. So if you find that you made it in error and you didn't really need to make it, you can always select it here in the action column and then click Remove up here. I'm going to leave it there for right now because we're going to come back in a few minutes and add a vendor pack to this item. So any questions at all on new cartons? So Bianca's asking, is the G10 number the UPC number the vendor assigns for the carton? Can it be the same UPC for the eaches in the carton? So I know some vendors do use the same UPC as for the eaches for the uniform carton. We don't recommend this. We recommend using something more unique, but sometimes they'll just add like the zeros at the beginning of the UPC to make it the right length. You can do it. We don't recommend it, but vendors do it. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. So any other questions on adding new cartons? Okay, so moving on to we got one more question. Can the uniform carton be shipped inside another shipping carton? So if you can't technically ship a uniform carton inside of another shipping carton, but you can include inners, I believe, in your uniform carton. On Monday, we talked about eaches and inners, and how the inners are the boxes that can go inside of your main carton and then inside of those boxes you can have your eaches. And then they can be broken out once they get to, let's say, the DC, and then those inners could go to other locations. Okay. So I think it's actually going to be on the vendor pack. Oh, okay. So here, I'm actually not sure if you can do that or not. I might have to check with the help desk, because you can. Right now, I have the number of inners as 10 because I just have all of my eaches in the box, so each is counting as an inner. I'm not sure how to change I don't know if I can do this on the vendor pack tab or if it's just not an option for uniform carton. So I might need to check with the help desk on that to confirm. So I'll have to get back with you. If you could do me a favor and email me that question, I will check with the help desk after the webinar, and then I will include that answer with the PowerPoint when I send it out today. And Jim is asking, do you have to add the each first and then the carton? Yeah, you do. You could technically go ahead and start creating the carton, but you wouldn't be able to, you wouldn't have anything to put in the carton. So you wouldn't really be able to complete the carton. You wouldn't be able to approve it. So carton creation is actually dependent upon those each packages so that you have something to put in them. And then Bianca's asking, so uniform carton is always a shipping carton? Yes, uniform carton is always a shipping carton. There are different types of shipping cartons, like exploding assortment carton, mixed carton, assorted carton. But yeah, uniform carton is always a shipping carton. So any other questions about packages before we move back onto UPCs? Okay. So I'm going to move on. If you do think of another question, you can always have the rest of the webinar to ask me, or you can always send me an email as well. All right, for UPC changes, a lot of times vendors will get their item set up, and then after it's set up, they realize that it has the incorrect UPC on the item. So the method for correcting that depends on your buyer and what they want to do with the KSN. If your buyer requires the same KSN, then you shouldn't actually have to do anything. Inventory has to strip the UPC and put the correct one back on. If your buyer doesn't require the same KSN, then you can just go ahead and sync over a new carton with data sync with that correct UPC. So it really depends on your buyer. You have to communicate with them and find out what they're wanting. Some buyers, especially if it doesn't have much of a sales history on it yet, they really might not care about keeping the same KSN. If it has more of a sales history and it's just something they're more concerned with, then they might really care about seeing that same KSN. So you do have to communicate with your buyer. So shouldn't really be much real action for you except for syncing over the new carton if they don't care about keeping the same KSN. So any questions about UPCs? Okay, I'm going to move on to vendor packs. We went over this some on Monday, but I still want to review. So you've been asked to create a new vendor pack for an existing item. So why would you need to create a new vendor pack? There are several reasons. Again, just as a review, if you have a new type, if you've been shipping an item DSD and they want to start being able to order it to the DCs as well, or if you have additional store format, you've been selling, your product's been selling in Kmart, they want to start selling it in Sears as well, you would need an additional vendor pack. If it's a different vendor, let's say a different vendor is coming in to take over an item a previous vendor was supplying. If you have a change in carton configurations, or a new each or member. And then finally, if you have more than one cost, in which case, example would be if your item has been selling in the 48 continental states and they want to start selling it in Puerto Rico and Hawaii, it's going to cost more. So it would need a new vendor pack for that different cost. So the most common errors when adding a new vendor pack, first off, maybe your desired ship point isn't available to select. So if your ship point's not available to select, we're going to go over the process for selecting or requesting your ship point to be added here in a few slides. Second possibility is that your DUNS number is not set up for the correct format, or your DUNS number isn't set up for the correct flow. So if your buyer is wanting you to use a specific DUNS, let's say you have multiple DUNS numbers, and they're wanting you to use a specific DUNS, and they want you to select DC, but it's not available in the drop-down, that means that DUNS is not set up for DC. Or let's say it's set up for Kmart, but it's not set up for Sears, and they're wanting you to select Sears. You can either email vendmain@searshc.com, or your merchant can put in a request to have that information added to your DUNS. So the process, again, it depends on how you set up your items. If you use data sync, your vendor pack should be synced over with the existing UPC. Now, if you've added a new carton, that's going to include a new vendor pack when you sync it over. But if you're just adding a vendor pack, you can just sync over the vendor pack with the existing UPC. Now, you can put multiple vendor packs on the same UPC. Doesn't change the KSN. So that would be the method if you use data sync. Now, if you set up your items manually, you either have to add or duplicate a vendor pack from the vendor pack tab in IMA. And I am going to show you how to both add a vendor pack and duplicate a vendor pack. So on the same item, we are going to go to the vendor pack tab, and we're going to click Add Vendor Pack. And it literally just comes up with the vendor pack page completely blank. So you have to complete all of the fields. So first, we're going to select what we're adding the package for, or adding the vendor pack for. We created the new uniform carton, so that's what we want to select here, because that's what needs a vendor pack. And then we're going to put in the DUNS. And after you select your DUNS, you can select your flow type. As well as your primary store format. So you kind of have to select them in order, and as you select your DUNS, then the page refreshed to populate this drop-down list for your flow type. After you selected your flow type, you may have noticed that the page refreshed again to populate options for the primary store format. So you kind of have to select them in order. So if you're trying to select flow type before you select your DUNS number, so moving on down, you then have to select your projected first in-store date. And input your vendor stock number, your order quantity multiple, and your order quantity unit of measure. And then on the right side, you have your California Prop 65 questions. So does your item require the 65 warning? We're going to say no, and there's also not a label on the package, so we're going to say no again. Then you have to scroll down further. Here, you will see these are all your tier groups, and the tier group that was defaulted for your item will be exploded out, and here you can see the DC locations. Now, the ship points and the cost for these are blank, so to populate those, because some of these tier groups have 6 or 7 DCs. So instead of selecting those for every single DC, you can come up here to this tier group section and select your ship point, enter your cost, and click Apply to All. And it'll come up and ask you if you want to apply it for all of the selected tiers, which I actually forgot one, so I'll have to do that again. This 8277, you may not have that. It's really common in apparel. So if you do have apparel and you're creating vendor packs manually, you have to be sure to add a ship point and a cost to that 8277 as well. So after you have completed all the fields on this page, you would click Save. I do want to show you, if you try to click off of the page, it comes up with this confirmation box, and it is asking, you made changes to this form, do you want to continue without saving? But normally when you're working in programs like Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel, when you go to exit, it asks you, do you want to save? So you would click OK without thinking about it, because that's just the default that your brain has been trained to. But here it's kind of backwards. It's asking if you want to continue without saving. So if you were to click OK, you would actually lose all the changes that you just made. So I just wanted to do that call out for you so that you don't have to experience that frustration. So what you would do is you would click Cancel, and then you would click Save. So once your vendor pack has been saved, you would click the Workflow tab, and then you would select Check for Errors, and then click Check for Error, Submit Workflow Tasks. So here when you see this, this basically means there's either errors or warnings. So if you scroll down your page, you can see that it's just a warning. Now you can completely ignore warnings. You don't have to do anything to resolve them. If it's a hard error, it would say error in red, and then you would know there's something that you have to do before you can approve it. Otherwise, it's just going to stay stuck in your role. Since there's only warnings, I'm going to go ahead and select Approve, and then I'm going to click Submit and Ignore Warnings. And now the item's out of my role. If we go do a search for it, you'll actually see that it is in the merchant row now. So any questions about adding vendor packs? So again, if you're using DataSync, you should be syncing this information over, but there could always be a circumstance where you might need to go in and do it manually. DataSync doesn't go down very often, but let's say it did go down and you really have to get this new vendor pack set up. That might be an instance where you would need to create it manually. So I just wanted to show you and walk you through that. Also, before we go on, I wanted to point out on the vendor portal page, on the IMA training tab, on the left side, or actually it's not on the left side anymore. If you go down the page, there is a section for documentation, and all of the maintenance that we're going to do today, there's documentation provided for that on the portal page, and it's pretty and it has a lot of screenshots, so it's really good to help you walk through if you do end up having to do one of these processes manually. So if there's no questions about vendor packs, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to talk about ship points. So there's a couple of reasons why you might need to change your ship points. Could be that your shipping location has closed. That would be really important to change your ship point, because if you don't change it, we could show up to your warehouse in Ohio, or your previous warehouse in Ohio, expecting to pick up product, but your product is actually waiting for us like in Pennsylvania or New York. So neither party is going to be very happy when that happens. It could result in potential. So be sure that if you have any shipping locations that have closed down, be sure that you update that information in IMA. You could also have adjusted your route for a better deal. I know I've mentioned this a couple of times over the last few days about how you can set up different ship points for different DCs. So if we have DCs in California and we have a DC in Pennsylvania, instead of just having us come to your warehouse in Florida to pick up product for both of those DCs, you may have a warehouse in, let's say, Utah and in Florida that both provide the product we're picking up. So we could go to the Utah warehouse for our California DC, or we could go to we can go to the Florida warehouse for our Pennsylvania DC. So you cannot set up different ship points for DCs for an in-process item. You have to wait to select that other ship point once an item has become operational. So the most common errors when changing a ship point could be, first off, selecting the wrong one. It's kind of would have the same result as if you closed the location and didn't update it. We could go to the completely wrong location to pick up the items. Another common error is that the desired ship point is not available. So if your ship point is not displayed in the drop-down menu, you would have to submit a request through the vendor portal. To do that, you would click IMA from the menu, basically the IMA homepage, and then further down the page, you'll see the section titled Ship Point Changes. Underneath that, there's a link that you can click, and that'll take you to a form. You complete this form to add a new shipping location and click Submit, and it'll take a few business days for that new shipping location to get set up. So just because you've submitted your form doesn't mean you can go back to IMA immediately and go ahead and select that new ship point. It's not going to be there yet. So it takes a few days to set up, and you will get an email whenever it's ready to be used. So to change a ship point, I'm going to go through this part really fast because we're actually going to go back into IMA so I can walk you through better on the selecting different ship points for different DCs. But you would do a quick search to locate your item, and then you would click the Vendor Packs tab and click the hyperlink to Vendor Pack number so that you can go into your Vendor Pack. Scroll down and select the box next to Change DC Locations, and then click Create Change Request. From there, you can select the tier groups that need to be updated, and then select your new ship point and click Apply to All. That confirmation message is going to come up, and you click OK, and then Save and go to Next. And then if you want to do different ship points, if you scroll down, you would click the plus sign next to your tier group to explode out your DC locations, and then you can select different ones and then approve through the vendor role. So let me go into the system, and I'm going to walk through that with an actual item. So okay, so you would go to the Vendor Pack tab and click your Vendor Pack hyperlink. Then we're going to scroll down the page down to this Change DC Locations box, and we're going to select that and then click Create Change Request. And then instead of completing this information here, we are going to scroll down the page, and here you can see your tier groups. So if you click that plus sign, it explodes out your DC locations, and here you can select different ship points. You know, and I did this like an hour ago, and it worked beautifully. I don't know why it's not showing the ship points right now. Let me try canceling it and try coming back in. I did it an hour ago on the same exact item, I swear. Sometimes our QA environment can be a little finicky, quirky at times, so I do apologize for that. I did want to show you in the actual system, but this is why I also had the slides created in case something like this does happen. So let's try one more time. So you can select, if they're displaying properly, you could select one ship point for here and a different ship point for this one. And I do apologize again for that, but you can see the screenshot more on the PowerPoint. So here you go. This is where you can select different ones. You can see that 223rd Street was selected for the first two, and then 5th Street was selected for the second two. So any questions about ship points? Okay, so I do want to go back for a second and talk again about vendor packs because I forgot to do one of the demos. So I don't want to forget that. So we're going to go back there really quick. I showed you how to add a vendor pack, but I forgot to show you how to duplicate a vendor pack. And there's definite advantages to duplicating a vendor pack. It just can't always be done. So to duplicate a vendor pack, you have to actually go into the vendor pack number. And then there is a duplicate vendor pack button up here at the top right. So you would click that, and it loads this page for you. And the first thing you select, you basically go left to right through the list, because until you select one thing, it's not going to select the others. Like, well, for flow type and primary store format, you wouldn't be able to select it. So we're going to select Kmart, and then put in our order done. So again, you should have a drop down for your order done. I just don't because of this on my ID. And then you select your flow type. We are going to do DSD. So since we're duplicating a vendor pack, you cannot duplicate a vendor pack with the same exact information because there would be no reason for that. So since my vendor pack that I'm duplicating from is BC and it's also Kmart, I have to do a different flow type, or otherwise the system will give me a hard error because it's going to be the same vendor pack that's already existing. So, and then let me scroll over. On the far right, you're basically just selecting the package that you're creating this vendor pack for. And then you click Create Duplicates. And it populates most of the information for you, but there are a few fields that you have to complete. So you have to click into the vendor pack number hyperlink. And here you can see it populated the DUNS, flow type, and primary store format that you had selected. It did populate the cost, the vendor stock number, the description, the order quantity. One of the things that you do have to update is the projected first in-store date, because the projected first in-store date copied over, and it's from 2010. That would give you a hard error in the system because the projected first in-store date cannot be any older than 3 months in the past. So we're going to update that. You also have to answer the Prop 65 questions. And if you scroll down, because this is a DSD vendor pack, we don't have any DC locations, so we don't have to enter any ship points. We also don't have to enter the cost individually for each DC location. The cost is actually just located up here. So once you've completed that information, you can just click Save, and then you can go to the Workflow tab and Approve. So any more questions about vendor packs or the ship points? Okay, then we're going to move on to dimensions and weights. I know we talked some about dimensions and weights during the IMA Basics and Terminology session, but today we're mainly just focusing on if those things need to be changed after the fact. So reasons that dimensions and weights might have to be changed. First one sounds kind of funny, but it's definitely true. Items are so old that they're wrong. Because we haven't always had the dimensions and weights rules in place. I think it's just been a few years ago, probably less than 5 years, that they started putting in the dimensions and weights rule. So if your items are, older than 5 years, it's very possible that they could be wrong. So you may need to go in and correct that either because you're trying to do some other change request that's giving you a system error for it, or just to make sure that it's correct for when we pick up your items. Another reason you might have to update the dimensions and weights could be that you added a new carton, and the new carton has the correct dimensions and weights, but the eaches are now wrong because they weren't correct to begin with. So if you add a new carton and you're not even touching the eaches, if you go to approve it and you get an error that has to do with dimensions and weights and it mentions your eaches, it could be that your eaches are wrong to begin with, even though you know that your carton is correct. So then you would have to go do a change request for your eaches in order to approve that new carton through with the correct dimensions and weights. So the most common errors when changing dimensions and weights, this is not just with dimensions and weights, but any change request, creating the change and forgetting to approve it. You got to make sure that you approve your change requests or they're just going to be held up in the vendor role. Also, calculating the cube incorrectly. So remember, it's the depth times width times height, and then there's a sum for the eaches, and then I think it's cube sum. And then your carton cube sum has to line up with however many of those eaches are going into it. So if you're getting frustrated because you're really having a hard time and you keep getting the error and you can't figure out how to fix it, try to actually maybe write down the math and calculate what the minimum should be. So the depth times width times height for the each multiplied by the number of eaches. And then you know that your carton has to be that minimum amount in order to be approved through your role. So the process to fix it can differ depending on how you do your item setup. If you use data sync, you can actually sync over your new dimensions or weights from your data sync provider. You don't have to change it manually. I know some of you may have older items that you maybe set up manually several years ago and you weren't on data sync at the time, and now you do have data sync and you'd like to be able to take advantage of syncing over changes or syncing over cartons or vendor packs, but you didn't sync it over initially. But you can take advantage of it. Talk to someone from your data sync provider. You can actually do like kind of a back sync if you have items in IMA that are existing but you didn't sync them over. And they can actually pull those back into their data sync system so that moving forward you can sync over those changes. And then if you do assorted cartons, mixed cartons, and pallet cartons, just as a reminder, they can't be synced over and you do have to manually update those in IMA. For the dimension exception indicator, we did talk about this on Monday, but as a reminder, it's when you have items such as, let's say, chairs that are stacked on top of each other, or nested items, or pillows that can be compressed into a box. The requirements for your carton may not be, they can be different than what the minimum cube value is. So in that instance, you could apply a dimension exception indicator, because otherwise it's never going to go through IMA if your carton dimensions are accurate, just because your items are nested or your items are compressed. So you can add a dimension exception indicator to the eaches, or the you don't have to add it to the cartons, just the eaches, and then that would allow your carton dimensions to go through. So to update the dimension exception indicator on operational items, you click on the Packages tab for a single item. You can also do it in the grid, and I do recommend doing it in the grid for multiple items. If you just have one item, it's kind of up to you whether you prefer to do it manually on the Package tab or you want to use the Changes grid. So if you're going to do it on the Package tab, you just click the Package tab, and then you select the box next to the dimension exception indicator field. And then from there, you click Create Change Request. You select yes from the Dimension Exception Indicator dropdown, and then click Save and go to Next. So again, because I know it brings up quite a few fields, it's actually located right here. And by the way, if you do need to update your dimensions and weight manually, you can do the same process. These fields are grouped together, the depth, width, height, dimension exception indicator, and then the weight. So if you select any one of those for a change request, they're all going to come here. So if you do need to update those manually, this is how you would do that as well. You just put the new values here on the right side of the screen. and then click Save and go to Next. It would take you to the Workflow tab, and you would approve it from the Workflow tab. So if you want to do it using the Changes grid, we went over some yesterday. These are just specific directions. So you would select Dimension Exception Indicator here, and then enter your KSNs, G10s, or core item numbers, and click Create Grid. You would enter your grid name and save it, and then it would automatically have those fields located right here in the default view. And you would just put the correct, update the answer on the green highlighted field, and then approve it. So any questions at all about dimensions and weights? Okay, so if you think of any questions, feel free to go ahead and submit them. In the meantime, I'm going to kind of do a quick review of our key points. If a carton configuration is not correct, you must create a new carton with the correct configuration. So if you remember, you cannot make a change in IMA. Once it's operational, you have to actually do a new carton. So a new carton always requires a new vendor pack, but a new vendor pack does not necessarily require a new carton. So you might have an instance where you need new vendor packs for your items, but you don't have to create a new carton for that. But if you do create a new carton, it has to have a new vendor pack. So it's best practice to sync over new cartons and vendor packs rather than creating them manually, although sometimes it's required. And then before fixing an incorrect UPC, communicate with your buyer to determine whether the same KSN is required. And finally, you must wait until an item is operational before you can select different ship points for different DCs. So later today, or if not today, then in the morning, I'm going to be sending out a survey link. I would really, really appreciate it if you would fill out the survey, especially since this is the very first time we're doing the IMA for Beginners as a webinar. So it's pretty different from what we were doing. And I just want to know, did you like it? Did you hate it? What do you think we're doing right? How can we improve? And then also let me know, what other topics are you looking for from IMA? If we get enough requests on topics, then we'll look at adding additional webinars specifically for those topics. So does anyone have any other questions about anything? I know I did speak with the SEN team about the question from yesterday, and they're supposed to provide a contact that I can send out with the PowerPoint today. But basically, it was not a completely clear answer, but most of the fields that are editable in SPIN don't actually exist in IMA. So those definitely would not feed to IMA. And from my understanding, most of the ones that do exist in IMA, most of those wouldn't feed either. But it sounded like there was a possibility that some of them might feed over. So I think they needed more information for specifically what field they're referring to. So they're supposed to be sending me a help contact for you, and I will include that with today's PowerPoint. Not a problem, Michelle. So anybody have any other questions? Okay, I will stay on the line for a while. Feel free to stay on the line if you do have additional questions. But thanks so much for joining us, and I hope that you found these webinars useful. And yeah, I hope you guys have a great weekend.